Tunu has already buried the man she loved once in her heart. But after a visit to her mother and an old woman in the mountains, her quiet life begins to crack. Every morning, she sends little Diep to school, sells papayas at the market, cooks, folds clothes, yet a single rumor and the memory of her child hugging a stranger and calling him Dad won't let her rest. She knows Truong is only missing, not gone, and sometimes it feels as if he might be walking the same roads as her, just a few steps away. If you want to follow this kind of slow, tender story, stay with the channel and listen to what happens next. The first morning after the trip, the wooden house was still quiet when Tunu opened her eyes. The roof stood low above her, rafters dark against the pale sky that leaked through small gaps in the thatch. She lay very still for a moment, listening. A faint wind pressed against the walls. Somewhere outside, a chicken called out once. Nearer, from the corner of the room, there was only the soft breathing of her son. She turned to check on Diep. The thin orange mattress under him sank a little with his weight. Blanket twisted around his legs. One arm flung over his head, his mouth slightly open. She pulled the blanket up to his shoulders and sat up. The floorboards were cool under her bare feet. When she stood, the house gave a small wooden creak, as if noting her weight. In the small kitchen corner, she lit the stove and poured rice and water into a pot. The water came to a quiet simmer. She stirred once, then left the ladle resting on the rim. The metal of the ladle touched the pot with a light tap. It was a sound she knew well. It always came when a day was beginning. She washed Diep's uniform in her eyes before she even touched it. White shirt, a little thin at the elbows, dark shorts hanging from a nail on the wall. She took the shirt down, shook it once, then spread it on the bed. Her fingers smoothed the collar, checked each button, pressed the fabric flat. The shorts were folded, then unfolded, then folded again so the creases lined up. She counted under her breath. One shirt, one pair of shorts, one notebook, one pencil case, one small towel. She laid each item in his school bag, in the same order, every morning. This was her small rule for herself. Things must go in the bag, in the same order, or the day might slip. Behind her, Diep shifted and opened his eyes. "Mom?" His voice was hoarse with sleep. "Is it time?" "Eat first," she said. "Then time." He sat at the low wooden table, feet not yet touching the floor. She placed a bowl of thin rice porridge in front of him, half an egg on top. Steam rose in a pale line. He blew on the spoon. His eyes stared somewhere past the wall, unfocused. "Mom," he asked suddenly, "when can we visit Grandma again?" "Later," she said, "when she is freer, when you do not have school the next day." "And the old lady with the geese?" he asked. Her house was funny. Tunu set another bowl on the table for herself. The ladle tapped the rim of the pot again, the same small sound. "Eat," she said, "or you will be late." He did not push more. He bent his head and ate, shoulders round, the thin neck she was always afraid would catch the cold. The road outside their house still smelled of cut wood and earth. The new house stood slightly raised on short posts, the staircase narrow, the railings simple and straight. Behind it, the hill rose up, green and dense. Tunu locked the door, the simple latch sliding into place with a dull click. Her hand stayed on the wood for a moment longer than needed. Diep walked beside her, bag on his back, his small steps trying to match hers. The dirt road had stones and scraps of wood scattered from the building days. She nudged a piece of wood aside with her foot so he would not trip. "Mom," he said. "Grandma looked thinner, right?" "She is tired," Tunu replied. "She cares for your grandfather and your step-grandfather. It takes strength." "She still cooked a lot," he said, almost proud. "She always does." They reached the place where the school pickup passed. Other children were already there, some in groups of 2 or 3, some alone. Tunu adjusted Du's collar for the second time that morning. She checked his bag strap, then wiped a grain of dried rice from the corner of his mouth with her thumb. He looked up at her. "Mom, will he wait for us?" he asked. Her hand paused at his cheek. She knew who he meant without him saying the word. She did not answer. The school car turned the corner, dust rising under its wheels. "Listen to your teacher," she said instead. "Do not fight with anyone. Remember to drink water." He nodded, climbed in. She watched until the car disappeared down the road. Only then did she turn back. The house looked small from the road, wooden and light, roof thick with dry leaves. It felt both new and already worn to her, as if it had waited for them longer than it had stood there. On the way to the market, she passed fields, a row of low houses, a mechanic's shed. She walked without hurry, but her mind was not on the road. At the edge of her thoughts, an old woman bent over a shirt, hands steady, needle rising and sinking through cloth, the sound of thread being pulled tight. Her stall at the market was a simple rectangle of space, a tarp on the ground, a wooden board to raise some fruit off the dirt, a hook for her bag. She spread the tarp, smoothing each corner, pressing them down with stones. Then she reached into her baskets and began to lay out the papayas. She lined them up in 2 rows, green skin mottled with yellow here and there. Some large, some smaller, but they had to sit evenly. Her fingers turned each fruit so the smoother side faced out. She counted again without thinking. 3 big ones in front, 5 smaller ones behind. The bruised one near my foot, so I remembered to sell it first. Work kept her hands occupied. Her hands knew this work well. Her head did not stay with her hands. The market was waking properly now. Voices rose and fell, the clack of a scale, the scrape of crates on the ground. Fresh greens here, fish still moving. A little farther away, someone called about eggs. She heard the word quail, and her throat tightened. Another voice, not far, called out about hot-boiled canarium. The word canarium seemed to ring a little louder than the others. Her mind slipped back to the small market where the old woman lived, to the boy rushing forward, to his arms around a stranger's waist. She pushed the image away and reached for the scale. A woman stopped by her stall. "How much for this one?" the woman asked, hand on a papaya. Tunu weighed, answered, wrapped, took money, made change. Her mouth moved correctly. Her hands did not shake, but each time a male voice sounded from somewhere in the crowd, she glanced up. Each time she saw a man carrying a sack, thin and bent slightly at the shoulders. She looked twice. Most of the time, the person turned, showing a face she did not know. Sometimes, she did not see the face at all, only a back disappearing behind hanging clothes and baskets. Just strangers, she told herself. The ladle sound from morning seemed to echo in her chest. Small, exact, impossible to ignore. By afternoon, the sun slanted low. She packed away some of the fruit, keeping the better ones for the evening rush. Then she left the stall under the eye of the woman next to her and hurried to meet Du. He ran to her from the school gate, bag bouncing. "Mom, today we learned a new song," he said, breathless, "and Ms. Liam gave me a star." He tugged at her hand as they walked. He talked about a boy who cried, a girl who shared snacks, the way their teacher laughed. She listened to his words. Between them, other sounds slid in. The faint honk of a motorbike horn, a cartwheel over a stone, a rooster calling from some hidden yard, the sound thin in the distance. When he paused for breath, he said suddenly, "Mom, do you think the old lady's son likes boiled canarium too?" She took a second too long to answer. "Maybe," she said. "Most people in that area eat it." Dewey nodded, as if this settled something. At home, she lit the stove again. Water boiled. The ladle tapped the rim 3 times in a row before she remembered to set it down more gently. She cooked rice, sautéed a little vegetable, reheated soup from yesterday. Du sat at the edge of the raised veranda, feet swinging, humming a tune he half remembered from class. After dinner, she washed dishes in a basin near the steps. The plates were few. She rinsed each bowl, let the water run off, then leaned them against one another in a neat pattern. Inside, Du changed into a worn t-shirt and shorts. She folded his uniform, smoothing sleeves, aligning edges. She carried the clothes to the built-in shelf and stacked them in a careful pile. At the end of the day, her body was heavy. Her hands still moved in the same order. Fold, stack, close the shelf door. The ladle in the kitchen corner dried slowly in the air, handle hooked over a nail. Metal and pot touched no more that night. But in her mind, the earlier sound lingered, like a faint mark that would not wash out. When Du fell asleep, she sat at the doorway. The yard in front of the house was rough ground, stones and bits of wood still scattered. Beyond it, darkness thickened among the trees. She did not call Truong's name, not even inside her own head. She only sat there, arms around her knees, and noticed this. Since the trip, every ordinary thing she did carried a shadow of another place, the old woman's house behind the mountain. The stall with quail eggs, the moment when a small boy ran to a man and called him a word she had not heard in years. The day had followed its usual line, yet something in it had already bent. The last sound she heard before going to bed was the faint tick of the ladle, knocking the pot when she nudged it by habit, just to check if it was really empty. Days passed. They lined up without gaps. Morning, wake, cook, dress the boy, check his bag, walk to the same corner of road, wait for the same vehicle, watch it take him away. Then the walk to the market, the unfolding of the tarp, the arranging of the papayas. Then noon hunger, a quick bite of rice in a corner behind the stalls. Then more customers, more weighing, more change. Afternoon, pack away the fruit that did not sell, walk to the school, bring Dewey home. Evening, cook, feed, wash, fold, look over his homework, lay the orange mattresses flat again, straighten the blanket. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside, each task had grown one more layer. On the road to school, there was a bend where the air always felt cooler. After the rains, the soil smelled darker here. The trees on the left side leaned a little in. The feel of this stretch of road was almost the same as the path near the old woman's house. Each time she walked through it now, Tunu noticed. Her steps slowed. Dewey kept talking, unaware. One morning, a man walked ahead of them for a while. He carried a sack of rice on his shoulder. Thin frame bent under the weight. The way he moved, the slight forward lean, hit her in the chest. She watched the back of his shirt. There was a pale patch sewn near the neck. Her fingers twitched at her side. When they drew closer, the man turned into a side lane, face angled away. He was gone before she could see his features. "Mom, you are walking slower," Du said. "Thinking about the money for school," she replied at once. He accepted that. He skipped ahead and tried to balance on the edge of the ditch. At the market, the sounds were the same as always. Only her hearing was different. "Boiled canarium here, 10 a bowl," a voice shouted one day. Her hand tightened around a papaya. She placed it on the scale, blinked, and forced her attention back to the number. Later, she passed the quail egg stall on the way to buy a little dried fish. The baskets were small and round, eggs piled neatly. For a moment, she saw not the stall itself, but the old scene that had lodged inside her. Dewey's back as he ran, hands clutching at a man's shirt, face pressed into a stranger's chest. She set the fish down too quickly on the counter. The seller looked up. "You look tired," the woman said. "Too much work?" "It is nothing," Tunu said. "Just the heat," the woman nodded, already turning to another customer. Near her own stall, a spool of thread dangled from a nail, left behind by the vendor who sewed bags now and then. The thread hung down in a straight line. When no one was watching, Tunu reached up and touched it with one finger. It felt smooth and dry. She withdrew her hand as if she had touched something private. At home, the signs were smaller. A shirt of Dewey's with a fraying cuff made her think of another shirt in another house, held in older hands. The empty corner of a shelf made her recall the single pair of sandals she had seen near the old woman's door. For each of these, her mind presented a counter voice. The old woman had said she had many nephews, cousins, godchildren. The adopted son could be one of them. Many men worked in markets, carried sacks, wore patched shirts. Many small boys without fathers might cling to such a man in a moment of confusion. She repeated these lines inside herself while she counted coins at the end of each day. After closing the stall, she would pour the contents of the small metal box onto her palm. Then she sat on the bed at home and sorted the money. She spread the notes out flat on the wooden floor. 2s in this pile, 5s in this one, 10s here, the large ones at the very end. She smoothed each note, running her thumb along the edge so it lay as flat as possible. Then she stacked them, smallest value on top, largest at the bottom, and wrapped the stack with a thin rubber band. The coins went in rows, 2 by 2, side by side, until she had a small square of metal circles. Her hands did this calmly, her head did not. Not every man makes your child hold on so tightly. Not every man ends up in the house of a woman who once said she had no children. Not every rumor points toward the same market. She never spoke these thoughts aloud. They stayed inside the movement of her fingers and the quiet of the room. Some nights, after the lights were out and the house grew colder, Dewey's voice floated out of the dark. "Mom? Will we go back to that market again? The one with the quail eggs?" "Maybe," she said, "when we have time." He turned on his side, mattress rustling. "If we see him, can I say Dad?" he asked. The words hung in the air. Her chest tightened. She swallowed once. "We will see how it is then," she said. "Sleep now. You have school." He was quiet for a while, then his breathing evened out. Slow and deep, she lay beside him, eyes open, watching the faint outline of the beams above. His question replayed, unchanged. "If we see him, can I say Dad?" Almost every time he said something like this, she answered by turning the talk to school or food. Outside, that habit still worked. Inside, it did not. One evening, the wind picked up and slipped through the gaps in the thatch. The room felt cooler. Dew slept early, tired from a long day. Tunu lit the small bulb hanging from the beam and pulled a wooden box toward her. It held their important things: a folded photograph, a few papers, a small packet of money. At the bottom lay her mother's letter. She unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled at the creases. Her mother's handwriting leaned slightly to the right. The sentences were short and spare. She read it from the beginning: the greeting, the mention of her grandfather's health, a line about the weather on the mountain, then the part she had read many times and never quite accepted. "There is a young man at a market near the old woman's house. People say he looks very much like him. I do not know if it is true. I only thought you should know." Her eyes stayed on that sentence. For a long moment, she did not breathe deeply. The thin strokes of ink seemed steadier than her own thoughts. He might still be alive, nearby. The idea pressed fully into her mind for the first time, clean and whole. It was not a feeling now. It was a possible fact. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the paper again, once, carefully along the old crease, then again, edges meeting neatly. She did not push the letter to the back of the box, as she sometimes did with things that hurt to see. She placed it in the middle, flat, easy to reach. She closed the lid with care. This was her decision, not to run to the mountain the next morning, not to startle Dew with plans. Only this: to stop calling her own thoughts foolish. The door of the house creaked softly when she stood up to latch it for the night. The hinge had a dry sound that she had grown used to. She paused, listening to it. Tomorrow, she thought, she would find the small bottle of oil and put a little on that hinge. There were some things she could ease. Other things would remain stiff until the right time. The last noise in the room before she lay down was that same door sound, softer now as she pulled it almost closed, leaving a thin gap for air. She woke before the first calls of the roosters. The air in the house was cool, the wooden boards under her feet colder than usual. She lit the stove and put water on. Her hands moved quickly, and the day's list ran quietly through her head. Make breakfast, dress the boy, open the stall, sell what she could, watch, for once, as if each corner of the market might hold something she had missed before. She packed Dewey's bag in the same order as always: shirt, shorts, notebook, pencil case, towel. She checked for his small ruler, his eraser, the plastic cover for his books. When they stepped out, she pulled the wooden door shut. The latch dropped into place with a crisp click. The sound was simple, clean. She liked that. "You are walking fast today," Due said, hurrying to keep up. "The morning will be busy," she said. "We should not let the papayas wait." He laughed at that, and the sound loosened something in her chest. At the school corner, she checked his hair, his collar, his bag strap. She lowered herself to his eye level. "If you feel tired in class, tell your teacher," she said. He nodded. "And do not fight with anyone," she added. "If someone bothers you, talk to Ms. Liam." He nodded again, impatient now to be off. "Mom," he said, hand already on the car door, "if we go back there one day, can I buy quail eggs myself?" "Yes," she said, "if you bring me half." He grinned, satisfied with this deal, and vanished into the vehicle. When it moved away, she stayed in place a moment longer, watching the dust settle. Then she turned toward the market. The latch sound of the door earlier stayed with her, a small, sharp note at the base of the morning. She reached the market before the sun had risen fully. The stalls were in a half-made state, some tarps still rolled up, some baskets covered. She greeted the woman who sold vegetables next to her, then unfolded her own tarp. She smoothed each corner, pressed stones down with the heel of her hand. The papayas came out of their baskets cool to the touch. She arranged them in 2 rows, turning each one so its smoother side faced the passers-by. She counted them once for stock. 12 today, she murmured. 3 large, 9 medium. It was a simple act, but it steadied her. Work kept the minutes from spreading too far. Around her, the market filled. Voices grew stronger. Metal clinked, wood scraped against wood. "Hot soup here, fresh greens, boiled canarium, just done." The word hit her again, but this time, she did not push it away. She let it enter, sit beside all the other bits that had been collecting inside her. She knew he might be somewhere in this tangle of voices and smells. She allowed herself to know it, without pulling back. Near mid-morning, while she was weighing a papaya for a young couple, it happened. At the far edge of her vision, a shape moved. A man's back, medium height, slight build, a sack slung over one shoulder. The fabric of his shirt caught light in a familiar way. There was a faint difference in color near the seam where the sleeve met the body, the kind that came from a careful repair. Her breath caught. The papaya in her hand slipped a little. It knocked against the edge of the scale. She steadied it quickly, forcing her fingers to obey. She finished the sale, gave the price, took the money, counted change into the woman's palm. "Thank you," she managed. The couple moved away. When she finally lifted her eyes, the man was already deeper in the crowd, turning down a row lined with hanging clothes and bags. For a moment, she could still see the line of his shoulders, that particular angle of his neck. Then, he was gone. Her legs felt heavy, as if they had sunk into the packed earth beneath the tarp. She gripped the edge of the wooden board until the grain pressed hard into her skin. Customers came and went. She answered simple questions, weighed more fruit. Her voice did not crack. Her hands did what they should. But at the back of her mind, a different set of movements played. Step out from behind the stall. Walk in the direction he had gone. Stop at the canarium stall. At the quail eggs. At the corner where sacks were loaded. Ask a few plain questions. Does a young man come here often? He works nearby? Does he live with an old woman who sews his shirts? Each of these sentences was possible. None of them left her mouth. When there was a brief lull in the flow of people, she wiped the board, though it was not dirty, and rearranged the papayas. She pulled the front row closer together, turned one fruit slightly, so its stem pointed in a neater line. Her heart still beat faster than usual. That man is almost certainly him. The thought did not feel wild anymore. It felt like the next step in a line of things that had already been laid out. The old woman's adopted son, the boy's sudden embrace at the other market, her mother's letter, the rumors. He might have walked not far from her stall every day. He might have eaten at one of these food carts, drunk tea at one of the tin tables, passed the spot where she bought fish or salt. She pressed her palm flat on the wooden board to steady herself. Her choice came quietly. She did not run after him. She did not abandon the stall, leave the fruit and the money box open. She stayed where she was and breathed until the rush in her chest calmed. From today, she told herself, she would not use the words gone or lost in her own mind when she thought of him. She would think, instead, not yet found. That was as far as she could move for now. A woman came by and asked, "Is that one sweet?" "If you leave it 2 days," Tunu said, "it will be just right." Her own voice sounded steady in her ears. When the market quieted toward noon, she counted her money in the box. She did it as she always did. Notes by value, stacked and smoothed, coins in a row along the edge, but each clink of metal, each soft whisper of paper, carried a new weight. He is not far, she thought. He is close enough to leave footmarks on the same ground my son walks on. She put the money away, closed the box, and tied it with a piece of cloth. She wrapped the remaining papayas in newspaper and placed them back into the baskets. Then she folded the tarp with slow, careful movements, corner to corner. Press out the air, fold again, until it became a neat rectangle that fit under her arm. She said goodbye to the neighboring vendor and stepped out of the market. The road to the school lay ahead, dusty and familiar. Dewey ran to her, as always. "Mom, today we wrote numbers all the way to 100, he said. "My hand hurt here." He showed her the base of his thumb. "You must hold the pencil less tightly," she said. "Show me tonight." He hopped along beside her. "Did you sell all the papayas?" he asked. "Almost," she said. "Enough for rice, enough for fish, enough for some salt and soap." "That is good." He thought for a moment. "Then can we buy a little snack?" he asked. "We will see what is left," she replied. They passed the cooler bend in the road. The trees, the ditch, the stones, everything sat where it always sat. But the way she saw them had shifted. Before, this had been just the road between home and school, between house and market. Now, there was something else layered over it. The possibility that somewhere along another road, not too far, a man with a repaired shirt was walking under the same sky, breathing the same cool air. "Mom," Dew said, "if we go back to Grandma's, do you think that uncle will be at the market again?" Her steps slowed. Then she matched his pace again. "I do not know," she said. "Markets change every day. If he is there," Dewey said firmly, "I will tell him I did my homework." She gave a short, low laugh. "You tell me that first," she replied. At home, the wooden house waited in the afternoon light. She pushed the door. The latch lifted, and then dropped behind them with the same clear sound as in the morning. She set the baskets down on the veranda. Tieu went inside, already talking about where to put his star from class. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The water would boil for tea and for washing. While she waited for the first small bubbles, she reached for the hinge of the door and moved it back and forth. It no longer grated as much as it had on the night she oiled it. Some things could be made smoother. Some joints could be loosened with time and attention. She did not know when she would see him, or how. She did not know if the next glimpse would come at this market or another one, or at the bend in some road. She only knew this. From now on, every day she stood at her stall. Every road she walked with her son, every sound in the house would be touched by the knowledge that he might already be within reach. In the kitchen, the kettle lid began to tremble lightly against the metal rim. The sound was small, steady, and clear. She turned off the flame, lifted the lid, and let the steam rise.